is a big story today, making the case for killing Americans. A Justice Department memo, which has just been uncovered, is laying out why the White House says they believe that it is okay to target our citizens overseas under certain circumstances. This is a brand new hour now of America's Newsroom. Good to have you with us, everybody. I'm Martha McCallum.
And I'm Greg Jarrett in for Bill Hemmer. This confidential memo reportedly describes why targeted strikes against Americans do not violate their constitutional rights if they're believed to be senior operational leaders of Al-Qaeda or an associated force, and even if there's no evidence that they are engaged in an active plot to attack the United States. Ambassador John Bolton is a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and he's a Fox News contributor. Ambassador, good to see you.
Glad to be with you.
President Obama would appear to have a rather different opinion of the Patriot Act and the war on terror than Senator Obama. Back then, he was highly critical of the Patriot Act and President Bush's methods of waging war. So I guess you get a case of the for reals when you sit in the Oval Office, don't you?
Exactly. Reality can do strange things even to ideological presidents like Obama, and I think you're correct, at least in broad strokes, on this question of targeting Americans and going after terrorists more generally. This memo appears to be consistent with the policies of the Bush administration.
Yeah, I mean, it has been longstanding rule that U.S. citizens who take up arms with the enemy are eligible to be attacked by American military forces. That has been the case in conventional wars in the United States, including 2 world wars, right?
No, absolutely. I don't think there's anything particularly new here. I think those who say, but there's no due process, are assuming the conclusion. If you assess the threat of international terrorism to be the equivalent of war, then you're in the law of war paradigm. This is not like robbing the local 7-Eleven where you resort to the law enforcement paradigm. And it doesn't mean that there are no rules at all. It means, as the memo explains, you have to be looking at people who are engaged in operations against the United States. And this memo appears to be fairly narrowly tailored and I think entirely appropriate to the kind of threat we face from international terrorism.
A couple of federal courts have recently considered what we're talking about, and one federal judge said, look, during war, the killing of an enemy combatant, albeit a U.S. citizen, is not a matter for judicial review. It's exclusively an executive branch function. You would agree?
Yeah, absolutely. The Constitution, I think, is very clear under Article 2 that the President's commander-in-chief power is not something that's judicially reviewable except in extraordinary circumstances. I think the risk is that we're trying to have lawyers litigate the war powers of the President rather than see them used as the framers intended.
Real quick last question for you, and let's put this up on the screen because this is from the recently leaked secret memo. The condition that an operational leader presents an imminent threat of violent attack against the U.S. does not require the U.S. to have clear evidence of a specific attack on U.S. persons and interests in the immediate future. Is that an expansion, Ambassador, of our pre-existing policy or not?
Not at all. Less than 2 months before Pearl Harbor, Franklin Roosevelt said, when you see a rattlesnake poised to strike, you don't wait until he is struck before you crush him. And he authorized the use of force against German submarines and ships in the North Atlantic, even if our ships were not fired on first. I think that's consistent with long-standing American policy.
And there's little doubt, given all of the evidence, Awlaki was a surrogate of Osama bin Laden and intimately involved in their terrorist operations. Ambassador John Bolton, good to see you. Thank you.